Hi everyone, how's it going? I am back to talk to you today a little bit, do a little bit of a history lesson in terms of the Hebrew Bible. I'm planning on doing more videos like this where I discuss sort of a secular approach to, or an academic approach to the writings of the Old Testament and New Testament. And so today we're going to be talking about specifically why it is we can determine that these books weren't divinely handed down to anyone, and how start to see how we're able to tell that these books were written during a specific time period. So, and please forgive me if you hear any crinkling. I've got notes on paper and I'm going to be turning pages every now and again. So the first thing we need to understand is that this is not, if you look at the Hebrew Bible, specifically, so the Old Testament, I guess, would be another way to refer to it, but that's technically a different designation to call it the Old Testament, and I'll explain that in a few minutes. So the first thing we need to realize is that it's not a continuous narrative, and I'll explore that in a later video that I do about the different authors. I mean, even just in the book of Genesis, how there are multiple authors who put those works together. The Hebrew Bible and the New Testament are more an anthology. They were produced, collected, and assembled in various stages. There were many authors and even editors that took these books and put them together as the Hebrew Bible, or edited and did various things to them to fit their specific ideology. So the Hebrew Bible is more of a selection of writings. There are other writings that we know about that were not included, that they didn't survive. We know, for example, in the book of Numbers, chapter 21, verse 14, there is a reference to a book of the wars of the Lord that is not included in the Hebrew Bible, and I don't believe we actually have a copy of it. I could be mistaken on that, though. So it's also not arranged necessarily in chronological order either, at least in terms of when they were written. I mean, even the book of Genesis, the very first section of the first chapter in Genesis was written by an author during the exile in Babylon, which was in the 6th century BCE, but the rest of it was compiled more or less either within the 10th or 9th century BCE, and the rest of it, I mean the other author who contributed to it. But narrative-wise, it is in a chronological order. The first dozen or so books in the Hebrew Bible recount the creation story, obviously in the beginning, and it goes until the early 6th century BCE. So in a chronological order, in terms of the narrative, yes, that's in a chronological order, but otherwise, in terms of when it was actually written, not so much. It doesn't mean that it was written in that order, opening in Genesis, and I'm sorry, it was written much later than subsequent chapters or books, and I guess I've already stated that. So the Jewish canon, there are 3 parts to it, to the Jewish Hebrew Bible. There's the Torah, or Torah, depending on who you speak to, which are the first 5 books, which are Genesis, Exodus, Numbers, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy. I might have switched Leviticus and Numbers around by mistake. And those are referred to as the books of Moses, and we'll get to that in a minute. After that is the writings of the prophets, or the Nevi'im, and then the Ketuvim, which are the writings. Old Testament, which I had stated before, is a different designation. It's a different book. And the reason it's different is that when the Christian canon, or specifically the Catholic canon, was put together, it took the books of the last books of the Hebrew Bible, or some maybe even in the middle, in the prophets, and moved them around because they wanted to make it appear that they were writing, predicting the coming of Jesus Christ, or Jesus of Nazareth. So Old Testament is a different designation than Hebrew Bible, specifically because of that. And so we need to make sure that that's clear when we talk about this. So the Torah is the first 5 books, as I already said. And I did switch the books up. It's Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. It's got a continuous narrative, not written in a time-wise, not in a chronological order in terms of when the books were actually written. Goes from the creation story to the death of Moses, which is why I had that little pause earlier. I thought that's what I had in my notes, but was not. Torah means teachings or law. It's traditionally believed that Moses had written these books, but we know that that's very unlikely to be the case. I'll get to that in a later lesson, or in a later video. The Nevi'im, the prophets, there's 2 divisions of the prophets. There are the former prophets, which are Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings. It continues in a chronological narrative, continuing on from where Deuteronomy leaves off. It begins right after the death of Moses, which is probably a reason we have to doubt that Moses wrote the books of the Torah, because he wouldn't write about his own death. He'd already be dead. There's a divine appointment of Joshua as the successor. It has the history of the Israelites in the Promised Land, the entry under Joshua to the loss of the Babylonians in 586 BCE, which was the start of the exile in Babylon. And then it has the latter prophets, which are the books after the individual prophets. So this was sometimes broken into major prophets, which are Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel, and the minor prophets, Hosea to Malachi. After that, we have the Ketuvim, which are a variety of books. There's the historical narrative, which includes the Book of Chronicles, that covers the chronological span of the Torah and the former prophets, and concludes with the return from exile. Ezra and Nehemiah continue that. Then we have the historical fiction. We have Ruth, Esther, Daniel, the poetical books of Psalms, the Proverbs, Song of Solomon, and Lamentations. These books often reflect on the human condition, as we see actually in the book of Job, which is included in that, and the poetry in Ecclesiastes. Now, in terms of canonization, the Torah has always been the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible. It's never changed order because it's narratively in a chronological order. It's been given authority because it's believed to have been written by Moses. Even in Ezra, chapter 7, verse 6, it mentions scribes skilled in the law of Moses, the Torah of Moses, that Lord God of Israel had given. The Torah, again, never varies due to chronology. Page. We have the writings after that. It's the last part. We have the prophets, which I think I had mentioned, change because of the Catholic canon, and because they wanted to make it appear as though they were writing predictions about Jesus, and we'll get into why those predictions, or why they thought those predictions were alluding to Jesus, are wrong. But the writings, the last part of the Jewish canon, was designated as authoritative, but not complete until at least the 2nd century BCE. 2nd century CE, so it wasn't even until after the life and death of Jesus, I have to get out of that mindset. It's my old Catholic brain kicking in. So after the Law and Prophets, Sirach mentions other books which are not included in the Hebrew Bible. Luke 24:44 refers to the Law of Moses, Prophets, and Psalms with vague designations. The third part of the Jewish canon imply fluid contents. Gosh, that's an odd note. Anyway, so the criteria for these books being included in the Jewish canon were the date. They should have been written between the 4th century BCE or attributed to an author that lived before them. The language, it was required that it needed to be written in Hebrew, or at least predominantly in Hebrew, because we do have books like Ezra and Daniel that have some parts in Aramaic. But they are largely in Hebrew. So these books became scripture or canon after the Second Temple destruction in 70 CE, or sometime at least between then and 135 CE. Despite different books in circulation, in other areas. It's stabilized in one form or another as the Masoretic text. Now, when the Christian canon comes along, it added the historical and narrative aspects of the book of Maccabees and 1 Esdras into the canon. There's added historical fiction in the books of Tobit and Judith. There was additions and revisions to the book of Esther and Daniel. There's longer poetical works like the Wisdom of Solomon, the Wisdom of Jesus, son of Sirach or Ben Sirach or Ecclesiasticus. There's also Baruch, the letter of Jeremiah, and the Apocrypha, which refers to hidden books. So these are all books that were not considered part of Jewish canon, and today still aren't, but that when the Christian Bible was canonized, they included these other books. We also know that there is pseudepigrapha, which are writings attributed to authors that didn't actually write them. We actually have many instances of these, like the four Gospels in the New Testament, Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John. We know they weren't written by them, but they were given the names to make them more authoritative and to make people actually read them. So the pseudepigrapha were writings attributed to Adam, Enoch, Abraham, Joseph, Jacob, and Job. None are canonical. They are widely known among Jews and Christians in antiquity, and it just shows a proof of a rich diversity in Jewish Christian literacy or literature, which is the same of Christian literature too. So even with the Christian canon, this was relatively stable until Martin Luther and Protestantism. The only books in which stated that only books in Hebrew were authoritative. The Apocrypha was no longer seen as canonical. It's not included in the Protestant Bible. And the Hebrew and Protestantism have the same contents, but they have them in different order, very much like there's a different order to at least some of the books in the Jewish canon in Catholic Bibles, but Protestantism keeps the original Hebrew Bible contents, but puts them in a different order. And during the Council of Trent in 1546, it decreed that all 46 books, including the Apocrypha, were canonical. All Jewish books of the Hebrew Bible accepted as canonical by all Christian communities, but in different order than the Tanakh. And this isn't to say that it's necessarily the same everywhere. I mean, you can go to different churches in the Middle East, and they exclude various books as well for various reasons. So, if nothing else, this should show us that the Bible wasn't dropped out of the sky in one complete volume, the Hebrew or the Christian Bible, that it's gone through various changes. It's gone through different orders depending on which sect of Christianity or Judaism you go to. So, hope we all learned something today, and I look forward to providing more content for you down the road. Thank you so much. Look forward to speaking with you again.